The Willow Heights Country Club was the kind of place where success was measured not only in wealth but also in appearances. The parking lot was filled with luxury cars, their polished chrome glinting in the afternoon sun. Inside, waiters in crisp uniforms carried trays of lemonade and champagne, weaving between manicured hedges and patio tables where members lounged in designer clothes. The sound of tennis balls smacking against rackets echoed across the pristine courts, mixing with polite laughter and murmured conversations. It was a charity event, an annual exhibition match hosted by the club to raise funds for local schools. But everyone knew it wasn't really about charity. It was about status. It was about showing off who had the best connections, who could donate the most, and who looked the most glamorous while doing it. At the center of attention, as always, was Eleanor White, CEO of White Properties, a real estate empire that owned half the luxury apartments in the city. Eleanor was striking in her white tennis dress, her blonde hair pulled into a sleek ponytail. Everything about her radiated control and power. People gravitated toward her not just because of her wealth, but because she carried herself like someone who always won, and made sure others knew it. Life is just like tennis, Eleanor declared to the small crowd of admirers gathered near the court. She twirled her racket with a flourish, her manicured nails glinting under the sun. It's about staying on top. Strategy, precision, and knowing how to crush your opponent. The group chuckled dutifully, though a few shifted uncomfortably at her choice of words. Eleanor wasn't known for her kindness. Her reputation was built on sharp deals, relentless ambition, and a streak of arrogance that left little room for humility. As she prepared for her warm-up, her sharp eyes landed on a man pushing a broom near the bleachers. His navy work uniform looked out of place among the whites and pastels of the club. His back was slightly bent, his hands rough with calluses. It was David Miller, the janitor who had worked at Willow Heights for several years. David wasn't a man people noticed. He kept to himself, quietly sweeping floors, polishing locker rooms, and fixing whatever needed repair. He never complained, never drew attention, and always carried a quiet dignity, though most members dismissed him as invisible. But Eleanor saw him now, and a mischievous smirk curled her lips. "David," she called out loudly, her voice carrying across the court. The janitor looked up, startled. He wasn't used to being addressed by the members, let alone in front of a crowd. His brown hair was streaked with early gray, and sweat glistened on his forehead from working under the sun. "Yes, ma'am," he asked cautiously, leaning on his broom. Eleanor tilted her head, her tone dripping with mockery. "Tell me, David, have you ever held a tennis racket in your life? Or do you only know how to hold that broom?" The crowd laughed, some covering their mouths politely, others not bothering to hide their amusement. David's face reddened, but he stayed silent. Eleanor, enjoying the attention, pressed further. "Come now, don't be shy. We could use some entertainment. Why don't you put that broom down and face me on the court? Unless, of course, you're afraid." The laughter grew louder. Someone whispered, "This should be good. The janitor versus the CEO." David glanced around. He could feel dozens of eyes on him, some mocking, some pitying, but none kind. He was used to being overlooked, but something about Eleanor's arrogance stirred something deep inside him. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw her, Emily, his 12-year-old daughter, sitting quietly on the bleachers. She had insisted on accompanying him that day, sketchbook in hand, drawing while her father worked. Emily looked at him now, her wide brown eyes filled with hope, with belief. To her, he wasn't just a janitor. He was her hero. David straightened, setting the broom gently against the bleachers. "All right," he said, his voice calm but steady. "I'll play." Eleanor raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Wonderful. Let's make it interesting, shall we?" She looked around at the crowd, making sure all eyes were on her. "If you can beat me in tennis, David, I'll marry you." She paused for dramatic effect before adding with a laugh, "Imagine that, a janitor marrying me, the CEO of White Properties." The audience roared with laughter, some clapping at the absurdity. Eleanor basked in their amusement, confident that she was untouchable. David, however, didn't smile. He walked toward the court, his steps measured, his expression unreadable. He picked up a spare racket offered by one of the attendants. It felt oddly familiar in his hands, the grip fitting perfectly as though it had been waiting for him all along. "Don't regret your words," he said quietly, his tone carrying an unexpected weight. The crowd hushed slightly, sensing a shift in the air. Eleanor brushed it off with a laugh and prepared to serve. The first ball came fast, slicing through the air with practiced precision. Most expected David to flinch or miss entirely. But with a smooth, almost effortless motion, he swung his racket and sent the ball back across the net with perfect control. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Eleanor blinked in surprise, then smirked. Beginner's luck. She served again, harder this time. Once again, David returned it cleanly, his body moving with surprising agility for a man who spent his days sweeping floors. The murmurs grew louder. Wait, where did he learn to play like that? Rally after rally, David revealed more of his hidden skill. His footwork was precise, his strokes sharp and deliberate. He wasn't just keeping up, he was outplaying her. By the end of the first game, Eleanor's confident smile had faltered. Sweat beaded on her forehead, and frustration crept into her eyes. David, on the other hand, remained calm, his movements efficient, almost graceful. Emily sat on the edge of the bleachers, her small fists clenched in excitement. She had never seen her father like this, commanding the court, stunning the crowd. When David scored the final point of the set with a blistering forehand down the line, the laughter that had filled the air earlier was gone, replaced by stunned silence. The janitor wasn't just playing tennis. He was performing a dance he had mastered long ago, one that none of them had ever expected to see. The crowd at Willow Heights Country Club had fallen into a stunned hush. Only moments ago, they had been chuckling at the thought of a janitor standing across the net from Eleanor White, the invincible CEO. Now, after watching point after point fall in his favor, their laughter had evaporated, replaced by wide-eyed disbelief. Eleanor stood at the baseline, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. Her once flawless ponytail clung to her damp neck, and her confident smirk had long since dissolved into a grimace. She gripped her racket so tightly her knuckles whitened, as if sheer willpower alone could drag her back into control of the match. Across the net, David Miller looked almost serene. His shirt was damp with sweat, but his movements remained measured, his breathing steady. He wasn't playing with the reckless hunger of someone trying to prove themselves. He was playing with the mastery of someone who had nothing to prove, but everything to remember. Each shot was precise, deliberate, and full of a quiet power that came from years of discipline buried beneath his humble exterior. Game point. The announcer called, his voice tinged with disbelief. Eleanor wiped her brow with the back of her wrist, glaring across the net. This isn't over, she muttered under her breath, more to herself than to anyone else. But even she could hear the doubt creeping in. She tossed the ball into the air for her serve, swinging with every ounce of strength she had left. The ball shot forward like a bullet, but David was already there. His return was sharp, angled perfectly to graze the sideline. Eleanor lunged, her feet slipping slightly on the court, and the ball whizzed past her racket. The line judge's call was immediate. Game, set, match, David Miller. For a split second, the world seemed frozen. Eleanor stood paralyzed, her racket dangling from her hand. The crowd sat in stunned silence, mouths agape, as if their minds were struggling to reconcile what they had just witnessed. Then the applause started. A few hesitant claps at first, then swelling into thunderous cheers. People were on their feet, shouting David's name, some whistling, some simply shaking their heads in awe. The janitor had beaten the CEO on her own stage. Emily leapt from the bleachers, her sketchbook tumbling to the ground as she ran onto the court. She threw her arms around her father, her small face pressed against his chest. "I knew you could do it, Dad," she cried, her voice breaking with emotion. David smiled softly, resting his hand on her back. His calm eyes lifted to the crowd, then to Eleanor, who still hadn't moved. Eleanor's face was pale, her arrogance stripped bare. She swallowed hard, looking at David as though seeing him for the first time. How did you?" she stammered, her voice cracking. David stepped forward, still holding his daughter's hand. His voice was steady, carrying a quiet authority that silenced the crowd. "You never asked who I was before I picked up that broom," he said. "You judged me by this uniform, by the work I do. But you never wondered who I was before." The crowd leaned in, hungry for his words. "I wasn't always a janitor," David continued, his gaze steady on Eleanor. 15 years ago, I was ranked among the top 50 tennis players in the world. I traveled, competed, lived the dream people here only talk about over cocktails. His eyes softened as he glanced down at Emily. But then life changed. My wife fell ill. She needed me more than the sport did. So I stepped away, hung up my rackets, and worked wherever I could to take care of her. After she passed, I needed stability for my daughter. So I took this job. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some whispered his name, others recalling faint memories of articles, matches, or highlights they had seen years ago. Pieces began to click into place. Eleanor's lips parted, but no words came out. She looked utterly undone, her usual sharpness dulled by shame. David's voice grew firmer, not loud, but full of conviction. You mocked me because of my job, because of how I look. But character isn't defined by wealth, by titles, or by who signs the biggest checks. True strength is how you carry yourself when life knocks you down. And true worth is something no amount of money can measure. The crowd erupted again, their applause shaking the court. Some even shouted, "Bravo!" and, "Well said." A few of Eleanor's own admirers turned their backs on her, clapping for the man she had tried to humiliate. Emily beamed, holding her father's hand proudly. She had always believed in him, but now the world could see the man she knew, the hero who sacrificed everything for family, yet carried himself with grace and quiet strength. Eleanor's racket slipped from her trembling hands, clattering to the ground. She bent quickly to pick it up, but the action seemed less about dignity and more about hiding her face. She whispered something no one caught, then turned sharply, retreating from the court without another word. David didn't chase her. He didn't need to. He had already proven his point, not through cruelty, but through composure and truth. He bent down and picked up Emily's sketchbook, brushing the dust off its cover. "Don't forget this, sweetheart," he said gently. She hugged it to her chest, smiling up at him with pride. "You were amazing, Dad." He chuckled softly. "I just did what I knew. The rest, well, I did it for you." As father and daughter walked off the court, the applause followed them like a wave. People reached out to shake his hand, some apologizing for ever underestimating him, others simply offering respect. David nodded politely, but he didn't bask in the attention. He had no interest in fame or validation from strangers. All that mattered was the little hand clutching his. At the edge of the court, he paused and turned back for one last glance. The once proud CEO stood alone near the clubhouse, her shoulders hunched, her aura of invincibility shattered. For the first time, Eleanor White looked small. David didn't smile smugly, nor did he gloat. He simply nodded once, as if to say, "Lesson learned." Then he walked away, leaving behind not just a stunned crowd but a story that would echo through the walls of Willow Heights for years to come. Checkmark moral of the story: never judge someone by their occupation or appearance. True greatness often hides behind humility, sacrifice, and quiet resilience. The measure of a person is not in what they own, but in the strength of their heart and the choices they make.